He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Is a student loan ever a relationship property? What's the best way to save for kids' futures? And can you get ACC payments to replace your income if you're over 65? These are all questions we're about to get into on this episode of No Stupid Questions. I'm Susan Edmunds, I'm RNZ's money correspondent. I'm joined by Justin Gregory.
How you doing? I no longer have a student loan and I'm not getting ACC payments and I'm not over 65, but that's all still to come.
So much to look forward to.
So much to look forward to.
Thanks for all the questions that have been coming in, some really interesting ones. Keep sending them to questions@rnz.co.nz.
First question for this episode comes from Bridget, who asks, what happens to my student loan if I pass away? Does it have to be paid off from my estate? And then she goes on, can a student loan be considered relationship property, in brackets debt, yeah, quite right, during a marriage separation, as if there isn't enough going on? If someone with a student loan goes overseas, is there really much the government can do to recoup that money? Yes, there is. Are they really detaining people at the border over this? 4 questions there, Susan.
Yes, so I'll go through these one at a time. If you die, your student loan will be written off. Apparently about 2,000 people die every year with student loan debt, which is then written off, which is a bit depressing.
Very depressing.
Yes, being in student loan debt until you die. And question 2, in terms of relationship property, a student loan is usually personal debt, so it's not shared if your relationship breaks up. But in some cases, it can be relationship property. But that's usually if you've borrowed money to pay for your living costs as a couple or something like that.
So probably not on the whole.
Probably not, but also maybe sometimes. Yeah, sorry. And as for the third question...
You don't make the rules. You don't have to apologise.
No, I don't. I just try and interpret them.
Yeah.
As for the third question, the IRD has been really cracking down on people going overseas with student loan debt or staying overseas with it. They've been getting debt collectors to chase people in Australia. And yes, you can be prevented from leaving or entering the country if you have a long history of defaults if you owe money. Arrests are rare, but they can and do happen. They have arrested people at the border when they come back to New Zealand.
Which is also a little depressing when you think about it.
Yes. So if you have student loan debt and go overseas, you need to keep up with the payments. I think it's twice a year you have to make a payment. And if you have already fallen behind, the best advice seems to be to get in touch with IRD and try to work out a plan.
Okay, nice. A related happy question. Greg has written in wanting to know about setting up his grandchild financially. Now, this potentially could be, to pay off student loan too, or not have a student loan in the first place, which would be great. All right. Greg says he is thinking about a regular savings account that the child could access when they become an adult, or making a contribution each month into a global index fund, or ETF. This could also be a thing for younger parents too, eh? I mean, if they have the cash. I'm thinking about this for, say, my 6-year-old or so on.
Yeah, definitely not just a question for grandparents. Continue.
All right, I will. Greg has listened to various investment podcasts, hopefully this one as well, and has heard mention of different savings platforms other than Sharesies, such as Kernel, InvestNow, Hatch, so on, and wonders if there's somewhere he can compare the merits of each against each other in terms of fees, tax efficiency, asset allocation, etc., as well as, crucially, of course, returns.
Yes, there's no one-stop comparison site like I think Greg is hoping for, which I agree would be handy. I went to talk to Kora founder Rupert Carline about this. He says there's not a huge difference between the different platforms. Kernel has the Global 100, which tracks the S&P Global 100, excluding controversial weapons. Or he mentioned you could go to Hatch or Sharesies to buy their MSCI Global Index Fund, which is a set and forget option.
And a good option. Okay, so what else does Greg, or me, for my 6-year-old, need to think about?
Rupert says it's just worth also thinking about whether you set it up in the child's name, the parent's name, or the grandparents.
If he's happy, if he's already made the decision that a global equities fund is where he wants to be, it's really about finding the one that is the easiest for him to execute on and the one that he understands, and probably the one with the lowest fees would be, makes not a massive difference, right? He's already made the right decision by saying, I just want to put it into a global equities fund.
Now, I've been wondering about this quite a bit, and when I first started thinking about it, my initial thought was to go to KiwiSaver, because people sometimes do open accounts for their kids there, don't they?
Sometimes it's less common since the government stopped offering that $1,000 kickstart to join the scheme. It removed that between my two children, so now my son has a KiwiSaver account and my daughter doesn't. I don't think she knows that at this point. But we save for both of them elsewhere because I like the idea of more flexibility.
Well, I hope she doesn't listen to the podcast, or does listen to the podcast, on the horns of a dilemma there. But this is my question too. It's about flexibility. Ultimately, I think we might veer away from a KiwiSaver account because you can only use it for a couple of things.
Yeah, that's right. When you're in KiwiSaver, your money is locked in until you want a first home or retire. But when it's somewhere else, you can pull it out for uni fees or travel or whatever you want to do within reason. But once they've got a job, then I think they absolutely should be in there and getting their employer and government contributions as well. Even Rupert, who runs a KiwiSaver scheme, says his kids are saving outside KiwiSaver as their main thing for now.
For now. Third question for this episode. Charette wants to know, does having savings of around, say, New Zealand $50,000 or less on top of KiwiSaver, does that qualify a senior to be approved for an accommodation allowance while they're flatting? There's a lot going on in this question. Superannuitants who are also flatting, or, ask Charette, will this be a deterrent if the Ministry of Social Development, MSD, sees that there's enough money on KiwiSaver and bank savings to pay for the weekly flatting rent?
Yes, any savings is pretty bad news for the accommodation supplement. You can only have $8,100 in assets or $16,000 as a couple or a single parent before you don't qualify for the accommodation supplement at all. And that threshold hasn't been changed since the supplement was introduced in 1993, so it's tougher than it used to be.
And this takes it all into account, doesn't it? Your cash, your investments, and so on.
All of it, KiwiSaver as well as any other money you might have in the bank. It's a big thing to be aware of if you're nearing retirement and think you are likely to need help with renting, because I think it is an unexpected hurdle for some people.
Something I've been wondering about a bit lately, and particularly over the last few months, is how can you be sure that your KiwiSaver isn't invested in something you don't want it to be invested in? By which I mean, how can you make sure your money's invested in a way that you're comfortable with, it's not supporting any companies or activity that you just don't want to give your money to?
Yeah, this is such an important thing for a lot of people. I know the FMA did some work on this a little while back, and they said for lots of people, they don't even realise where their money is until they get what they call an ethical jump scare.
That's where you suddenly realise you're funding something you really don't approve of, like Australia or something.
Yeah, and you get such a shock that you just try and do something straight away. So you just womble around looking for another option and grab the first thing that seems like it could be suitable. And it can be really hard work to find out how you can align your investments to your personal beliefs. There's also been that chat about greenwashing, companies making it sound like they're more ethical or responsible than they really are.
So what can you actually do? What are the literal things that you can do to make this, to avoid the ethical jump scare?
A few things. So your provider should be able to tell you where your money is invested. So that's an option. If you want to compare funds or look at what might have been raised as a concern about your fund, you could use Mindful Money. It's a really handy online tool that helps you dig into where your money is going. Even financial advisors I've spoken to who specialise in responsible investing tell me that this is the easiest way to get a good overview. Then it's also a situation where you just have to sort of keep checking because holdings can change and the things that you might be concerned about could change too. So check in every so often and make sure there's still alignment. And if you want more information, your provider should be able to give that to you.
All right, talking about ethics and just setting them aside for one moment, is this going to cost me money?
Well, I haven't seen any evidence of that. When oil prices soared in the Ukraine conflict, there was a time when the funds that didn't have that fossil fuel exposure suffered a bit in comparison. But all the research I've seen shows that people who invest responsibly tend to do at least as well. I guess if you're worried about avoiding risks like environmental concerns, you might be keeping up with changing technology a bit more. There might be less risk of stranded assets, something that's no longer useful. And having an eye on the future might help businesses do better. It's just really important to make sure that you don't just hear a provider say, oh, we're so responsible, and take them at their word and dig a bit deeper. I know one other thing, when I was talking to Mindful Money about this, Barry Coates said there's been a real shift to passive investments lately, which is where they just track a market index. They don't, make active decisions about the investment. And he said, with that, there might sometimes be a trade-off that there's not as much research going into it, which I thought was quite interesting.
Okay, we are changing directions entirely at this point. Ken says he's working as a contractor, he's past the age of 65, and he's getting the pension. Now, if he's injured at work, can he get ACC compensation for lost income?
You can get NZ Super and ACC payments for 2 years if you injure yourself after turning 65, and if the injury is covered by ACC, obviously. And at the end of the 2 years, you go back to only getting NZ Super. If you're injured before you're 63, you can get it until you're 65. And if the injury happens after you're 63, it's that same 2-year rule. So the answer for Ken is yes.
And we've got another pension question related to this. Steve says, I've got a question that's always bothered me and I'm yet to get a satisfactory answer. And his question is, why do we pay tax on our pension when it's coming from the tax that we've already paid? I was always of the understanding, says Steve, that you can't be taxed twice. After all, isn't that double dipping?
I think a lot of people think that during their working lives they're paying into some kind of pension pot that then pays out when they go to claim NZ Super. But that is not the case. People who are paying tax now are paying for the pensions being received now. So people on a pension now pay for the pensions of people who were retired while they were working, and so on.
So this is a complete misunderstanding of what money when and for who, isn't it? Because literally, I'm paying for the people who are retired now. When I'm retired, the people who are behind me will be paying for me, and so on, if superannuation and pensions last that long.
That's right, if there remain enough taxpayers after us to fund our retirements. But yes, that's right. The pension isn't coming from taxed income any more than anything else that's government funded is. We talked about tax on benefits last year, and I guess this is just the same thing. It's weird that the government is basically sending money to itself, but it's mostly an on-paper exercise. We need to know the gross amount because not everyone will pay the same rate of tax on their New Zealand super. If you have a job, for example, you might be paying a secondary rate of tax on the pension.
We had inflation data last week, joy of joys. That seemed to come in as a bit of a surprise. What happened there, Susan?
Yeah, inflation came in higher than some people were expecting and above the Reserve Bank's target range. It's added to the muttering we've been hearing about how interest rates might start rising more quickly than previously expected. I see Infometrics has said that maybe the OCR could be up for an increase as early as May if the data aligns.
All right, brass tacks, I've got a mortgage. What is this going to mean for me and my mortgage repayments?
I wrote about this recently too. It actually seems that we might have passed the bottom of the market for the long-term rates now. When I was researching that story, I saw Reserve Bank data that said that longer fixes, like 3 years-ish, dropped to an average 4.5% in November, and they're higher than that now. So if you have been holding on, hoping to pick the bottom of the market, you might be late. But still only a fraction of a percentage. I think I saw 4.69% advertised, so that's still not really that bad. But if you want to lock in a longer term, I would look at doing that now. That's not personalised financial advice, that's just what I would do. And most people seem to think that rates will stay fairly flat from here, but could start to lift more seriously towards the end of this year.
Speaking of inflation, last week we asked you what year wine coolers and waterbeds were taken out of the CPI.
The answer is 1993. Because we had so much fun noodling around with that data, we have a question in a similar vein this week. When were 2-minute noodles added?
Probably not the year you think they were, but send your answers, as well as any questions you might have, to questions@rnz.co.nz, and Susan will answer them in our next episode.
I will. Bye for now. No Stupid Questions with Susan Edmunds was written and presented by Susan Edmunds. That's me. Justin Gregory is the producer. The engineer is Phil Benj. Thanks to Bridget, Charette, Greg, Ken and Steve for their questions, and Rupert Carlyon for his answer. Follow and listen to No Stupid Questions with Susan Edmunds on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or any podcast app so you don't miss an episode.